thank you for braving the cold, everybody. Really do appreciate you coming in. And thank you for everybody who's tuning in live on the interwebs. I guess we've got a few people from around the country and the world. So hello to all of you.
Many thanks.
So I've got Joe here. I think that pretty much everyone who's here and who's watching know who you are. You've been a inspiration to many, a mentor to me. You and I met. I was a student at the Churchill Downs photography workshop 10 years ago. That was when it was 10 years ago, and you were part of this workshop, and you gave all sorts of inspirational speeches as you do, taught lighting at that point. I mean, I'm sure you do still also use the small systems. A lot of the small systems you were using I think TTL strobes or whatever, and teaching all of that. So yeah, just a big thanks to you for doing everything you do. And before we get started, Joe, I just wanted to give a quick couple of shout outs to a couple places and people. First and foremost, I wanted to thank Adorama, which is where we are today. We're in their pro space, their event space here. It used to be the pro space where your wife used to work.
Absolutely.
In the pro department, but they've turned this pro department into this really beautiful event space where they host live events and a couple of our podcasts per month, and as well as some networking events that we host here and have some great speakers, some of which are in the audience right now. So if anybody would like to check out what we do, check out our live events, just go to Photo Brigade, thephotobrigade.com/live. And if you want to see more of what the Adorama events they have in line, just go to adorama.com/events. Additionally, I want to thank Photo Shelter, a website that I think both you and I use. Mm-hmm. Photo Shelter, they're really great people. They put out a great product, whether you're looking for a website or you're looking for a way to archive your archives, digitally, securely archive them and off in the cloud, I guess you could say, or deliver your photos and whatnot. But everyone should check out Photo Shelter. Also, thanks to Tenba bags. They make some great bags. And, of course, Rode Microphones for hooking us up with these fancy.
They are fancy.
Fancy.
They definitely are.
Yeah, very fancy microphones. Lastly, I always like to shout out professional organizations such as NPPA, ASMP, .org. You can check those websites out, but they're basically professional organizations for us as photographers. They help represent us when it comes to legal matters and all sorts of great information and help for photographers as professionals. What else? Do we have anything else that I should... also, in regards to our podcast here, a lot of people have started tuning in here online for the video podcast, which just started. This is actually our 61st podcast, and we've only done maybe 5 video podcasts so far, but people can go to iTunes and listen to over 60 audio podcasts that I've done with some really great photographers. And as you'll see today, we talk about business, photography, how people got into this field, how they've developed, how they've transitioned from film to digital, and all of the above. So everybody, please check us out on iTunes and YouTube and subscribe to us and Photo Brigade, thephotobrigade.com/live.
Well, thank you again. I mean, I'm honored to be here. I mean, you've had some wonderful colleagues on this podcast. David Burnett was on recently.
Yeah, David was our first video.
He was an icon to anybody who's ever picked up a camera, so I'm very honored to be included. Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to move this mic so it's more in your face. Okay. All right. So let's talk.
Makes me want to break into song.
Oh, yeah. You want to? That can be our little promo or something like that. Well, we're getting a nice little crowd. You draw a crowd. I'm impressed. You do all these talking gigs. Everybody knows who you are. Everyone comes for whatever you do.
Well, I see a lot of friends in the audience. I'm very thankful to them. We got the big guy in the back there, Jeff Snyder, at Jeffrey Picks, his Twitter handle. And I'm also thankful to Adorama. I mean, years ago, I began to partner Adorama. Harry Drummer and Jeff kind of constructed something, and I needed some help with the Faces of Ground Zero project, which is a very, very, it was an important project, for our studio. Certainly it's kind of bulky and cumbersome to manage over the course of many years. And on a handshake, they said, look, we're going to help you out with this because it's a good thing. And they've been tried and true in that respect. So I really am thankful to be here.
Yeah. They're a great organization, great store, and it's for anybody that's interested. It's on 18th Street and in Manhattan. So if you're in New York, check us out. Check it out. Yeah. It's not me. It's Adorama. Also, since you guys are all here, you are able to get 10% off many things in the store. So let them know that you're with us today, and buy yourself some film or some gear or whatever you guys might need.
Well, if you came here and have a seat today, Jeff Snyder promised to go down the block and get everybody a cappuccino.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, Joe, let's. I want to jump into. There's so many things that I want to talk with you about, mainly about your business and about how you became this Joe McNally that you are today. Like I said, you've done a lot of talking, but let's start, I guess, with your background. When did you get into photography? Where did you grow up? When did you get into photography? And how did you know that was going to become your path?
Okay, I'll be brief. I grew up all over the place. Went to 5 different grammar schools and knocked around, the country. Kind of. My dad kept changing jobs, which is actually pretty good training to be a photographer because you're always the new kid. When you show up with a camera in your hands. Went to journalism school at Syracuse University. Was forced to take a photography class during the curriculum to become a writer. Left there or was concluding my education there, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do the writing gig. I really want to do photography. That's what this class acquainted me with. And so I stayed in Syracuse for a couple more years, did some more training there, and then immediately came to New York City and was introduced to the School of Hard Knocks.
Oh, yeah.
And thought I could get a job as a photographer. That was a ridiculous presumption on my part. The only job I could get in the world of journalism was that of a copy boy at the New York Daily News.
Oh, interesting.
I was taking home $109 a week, and I was living in the Hotel Beacon in 1976. Really? In 1976, you did not want to know the West Side Story.
New York was a different town back then, I hear.
The city was broke. That was the era where the Daily News came out with the famous headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead." Because the city was bankrupt, crime was everywhere, the subways were a mess. Just below my building there was what was just the triangle that was north of the 72nd Street subway station was probably the biggest influx of heroin into the city.
Oh, yeah.
Bill Epridge did a very memorable...
I was just thinking about that. I used to live on 74th in Amsterdam, and that's actually where my wife and I met. She was my next-door neighbor.
Bill did a phenomenal story. I always remember the slug, the headline, "We are animals in a world no one knows." And he profiled heroin addicts who were living on the Upper West Side of New York. It's a very powerful photo essay. And that's where was my first introduction to New York. And I was a gopher, basically. I moved paper from desk to desk. I would go and get coffee, and
paying your dues.
Yeah, I mean, the editor said, "Hey, you, here's $1. Go get me a light and sweet." And I'd come back up, and I'd come back, and I'd put a light and sweet down and put the change down. He goes, "Hey, wait a minute." And he'd slide a nickel across the desk. "That's for you."
Oh, that's nice.
Which I took because the 104 bus on Saturday nights after 10 o'clock would go from 50 cents to $0.25, which meant the 104 went through Times Square and up 8th Avenue back to my house.
Yeah.
And I could get home for $0.25.
Wow.
So a nickel wasn't bad.
Wow.
That was part of my ride home.
So you didn't have any real traditional photo training? It was more journalism training?
Well, no, I did have photography training. They allowed me to continue to take photo courses. I was required to take one class as part of the writing curriculum in photography, got fascinated with it, petitioned to take another, and then I did a master's degree. I stayed in Syracuse, and I got an assistantship, which meant that a graduate assistantship paid for 9 credits plus a living stipend. So I got a free master's. I stayed there for 2 years, and I did a master's degree in photojournalism, and then came to the city.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. Syracuse. There's a great group up there.
I was working at the Daily News, and the guys there were like, "You did what? You got a master's degree? Come with me, kid. I'm going to show you what you really need to know." And that was...
Well, I mean, and that honestly, getting that real world experience and just being thrown into the environment.
Oh, God,
was huge for you. It was probably learned so much more than you did at Syracuse with your master's and all of that.
Well, the beauty of having gone to school photographically, and I emphasize this when I teach, is becoming acquainted with the history of photography. And I revere those who have gone before, the true masters of this craft. We're talking, people like Gordon Parks and Alfred Eisenstaedt and Carl Maidens and people like that who really are created the archive that is the shoulders upon which we stand. But I was also able to mix that kind of very sort of pristine education with the hurly-burly, as you might call it, of New York City press tabloid journalism. I mean, my first time in a radio car, I was riding with Jimmy McGrath, and he gets a call on a jumper, you know, at like 60th and Park. And he starts booking on this like crazy. And he's driving, running lights and stuff like that. I'm like, why? You know, it's just a possible call. He goes, 60th and Park, it might be a rich guy.
Oh, no.
Hence the equation of tabloid journalism in New York. It might be somebody famous, might be somebody rich, somebody take a jump. Oh, man, that's big news. And, and in fact, that was actually the first time I had been at a spot news scene like that.
How did you feel about doing that kind of work back then? I mean, obviously, you know, since then you've worked for some of the most amazing publications, National Geographic, Life magazine, you name it. But how did you feel about doing that kind of tabloid journalism or being part of it at that point? Was it just like, okay, I'm getting my, getting my foot in the door, figuring it out? Did you really enjoy, you know, going and rushing to cover something like that?
I loved it. My counsel to any young photographer, and it's less viable now, unfortunately, but back in the day, I think becoming a part of a newspaper as a staffer, as a stringer, is the best education any photographer could get, because it forces you to move fast, think on your feet, and just react and improvise very, very quickly. I loved the daily newspaper regime and the wire services I worked for, even though I started to realize I was never going to be any good at it. You know, I didn't have the nose for news. My imagination was more where I lived. I started to shoot some color, and I started, you know, I mean, the Daily News reinforced my doubts by firing me.
Oh.
So, you know, 3 years in, they said goodbye, you know, and a restructuring and a downsizing. It was kind of the beginning of what has become very familiar news. And I hit the streets, and I had to make a living with a camera, and I started stringing for the wires, and then I got offered an odd duck of a job. I became a staff photographer for ABC Television Network.
Interesting.
And I walked in there, and my boss said, you know, we shoot Kodachrome, and we light things, and, you know, that's what you're going to do. And I'm like, Kodachrome. How do you spell that? You know, I mean, lights.
So that was your first jump into lighting?
Absolutely.
At ABC?
Yeah, I taught myself. Never assisted anybody, and thankfully it was a job that expected failure, and I routinely delivered on that expectation.
Very nice.
You know,
very nice.
Well,
you learn from your failures.
I learned, yeah. As a still photographer for the network, you're always the caboose of the operation. You're never the primary reason you're there. So you're always fighting for an angle, fighting for a spot, fighting for 2 minutes with the star or something like that. And then you have to hit it hard. And they didn't expect much, sending you out. Like, they don't want you there, see what you can do. And it was a good job on that level, because you'd have to adapt. You know, one day you'd be in the studio trying to shoot a still life of an Emmy. The next day you'd be trying to shoot a beauty portrait of Susan Lucci on All My Children. And the next thing you know, you'd be at ABC Monday Night Football.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So did you shoot any of those like set photography, like during recordings of shows and whatnot?
All the time.
You had to use a blimp?
Had to use camera blimp a lot of times. I was fortuitously located. I had upped my quality of life in New York, and I moved into a studio apartment on 65th Street, which was great because David Hartman, that's a name from the past, all of Good Morning America fame at the time, was filming Good Morning America literally on 66th Street. So I'd stumble out at 5:30 in the morning, and I'd go shoot David Hartman.
Oh,
you know,
very nice.
You know, and that was the start of my day. Oftentimes was on the set at Good Morning America.
You know, you said you moved to 60 what and where?
65th between Columbus and Central Park West.
That's also right where Arnold Newman was.
Yes.
And he was actually the reason why I came to New York for the first time ever.
Wow.
He invited
Greg Heisler.
Oh yeah, we had this conversation. I had a podcast with Greg about this, but we have that in common. Arnold was talking at Ohio University, which is where I went to school, Ohio University School of Visual Communication, and he looked at some people's portfolios, and I was, I think, one of the only undergrads that he looked at, but he said, next time you're in New York, stop by, I'll buy you a sandwich. And I said, I had no plans to be in New York, but I built an entire trip around that invitation.
Sure.
And at that point, that's when I ended up doing, talking to numerous showing my portfolio. I showed my portfolio for internships, which ended up leading to an internship at the New York Times and yada, yada, yada. Yeah. So it's really amazing. Every time I walk by that street or walk down that particular street, I say to my wife, this was the first time, I came to New York the first time on this street. She's like, I know.
Yeah.
I guess those stories come more and more as we get older, right?
You never know in this business. Things knock into each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes in a bad way, but hopefully most of the time one door closes, another door opens. You never know exactly what a phone call or a chance meeting or a portfolio review might end up doing for you. Uh-huh. So I find, that I've had no plan for 35 years. I've just done whatever seems to be the next best thing to do. And that's the kind of industry it is. I think if you come into this with kind of a straight line plan, maybe it can work. My hat's off to you if it can work, but more often than not, the path of a photographer is very erratic or lots of curves, let's put it that way.
Yeah. I think one of the other things I should mention, I'm just going to move this again, so you're
sorry,
facing me a little bit. That's all right.
I think I'm afraid of it, actually.
I know, it's got this big cage on it. Maybe I should remove it.
I don't want to break it.
Don't break it.
Just a small town. No, sorry.
Living in alone. Sorry.
You can't. Go ahead. Where were we?
Okay, so we mentioned a lot about this whole, so this was a while back. You were obviously shooting film back then. This was a different world than it is today. So a photographer trying to jump into the world of photojournalism or portrait photography, commercial photography that come here to New York might take a very different path than you did because we live in the world of digital, social media, the ability to send emails and see, talk directly to these editors who you would have. Sure. I mean, I was listening to a podcast that you were talking about before this, just to kind of, learn a little bit more that I might not have known about you. But I heard you had one year put your name in a black book. This is like I didn't even know what that was. Because it's, I think, before my time, I guess. When I graduated, no offense,
Robert, we did things differently.
I mean, and that's what's interesting to me and a lot of people that are listening to this because they're students. Just a totally different process. And I think that you have done a really great job in embracing all. There's a lot of great photographers out there, really, really stellar photographers who don't get involved in social, that don't get involved in sort of the digital revolution. And I think they do a disservice to themselves and by not. I don't know if you would agree with that or not. I think there's something good about keeping your distance and not being too in your face socially, but having a presence and being able to network through these means is important.
It's certainly important to us. Each photographer seeks their own path. And for us, as we've kind of changed as a studio, social media and marketing has become definitely part of our picture. And also, I've been a bit of a knockabout photographer for many years as a generalist. I don't know if people in the audience might know the name Mary Ellen Mark.
I've heard of her.
Well, Mary Ellen's vision was so strong for so many years that at a point in her career, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, believe this was true, clients would approach her and Mary Ellen would say, yes, I'll work for you if I can shoot 8x10 black and white. That's my current aesthetic, and if you are comfortable with that, I'll shoot the job for you. And people still signed her up to work for them. They adapted to her set of strictures because she had this vision that was very powerful. That's never been my gig. I'm a generalist because one way that's suited my personality, but another way, like, as I always say, it kind of chose me because I'm just not that good at any one particular thing. So I realized I had to do a whole bunch of things. So I've knocked about in this career, and I think our current condition of our studio is a reflection of that. We still do some editorial work. We do some commercial work. We do some social media. We blog. I do a lecture here and there. I do a podcast. We stay in the mix.
Yeah.
And that's been our path to survival.
One of the things that you said that I think is really interesting, and I've talked about it on basically all the podcasts, is you mentioned being a generalist. Some photographers will say, in order for you to be successful, you have to find one niche of photography and stick to that and master it and be known for that. Mm-hmm. You've taken this career path, and I think that I've kind of followed in your footsteps where, I can do journalism, documentary, portraiture, commercial work, down the line, where it opens up a lot of different opportunities, not just for great photography and great opportunities, but for revenue. As a freelancer these days, we have to really take into consideration, where our sources of revenue are coming. Mm-hmm. And especially in the journalism world, I think that we can all attest that it's the least paying portion.
Always has been.
But some of the best content of photography.
Absolutely.
And what do you like more? I mean, I like the jobs that pay a lot of money, of course. Don't you? But I would love, sometimes I just love to go out on a shoot for the New York Times or a shoot for, a magazine that you spend the day with a certain person and tell a story. Don't get paid as much, but you've opened up a door, and there are also avenues you can explore within. Every time I meet someone, whether it's a editorial client or commercial client, they become someone that and it could be a seed that can be planted for something down the line. Do you use that a lot? Do you find clients of yours or people that you've worked with in the past have a way of popping up in the future, whether it be through an anecdote or I don't know, something, a future assignment maybe?
Sure. I mean, you touched on two things there that I always try to teach young photographers when I'm involved in a scenario like that, and I think you're roughly referring to food for the table and food for the soul. You have to have both as a photographer. You have to keep your creative soul alive, which sometimes means that you're shooting on a self-assigned basis and you're not making any money at all. Mm-hmm. And then you have to stay commercially viable and shoot jobs for money, or you cease to be a photographer.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind as you go forward. And as a young shooter too, you also have to find, again, I say this pretty frequently, you have to find something that you truly love to shoot. If you can find that, like, again, I hark back to Jay Maisel.
Yeah.
Jay would always say that, he'd shoot a corporate job for $1 gazillion. And then that night he'd go to his roof and he'd shoot sunsets just to feel clean again. And that was his kind of cleansing, or and you have to have both in your life as a photographer if you're going to keep going forward, because the unromantic part of this is that every freelance photographer out there, myself included, wakes up every morning with the time versus money equation in their head. How do I take my time and turn it into money? How do I take my pictures and turn it into money? And that is not particularly, it's not talking about photography in romantic terms. It's talking about photography in sustainable, survivable terms. Yeah. And that is a reality all of us face.
I think that the dream for all photographers as professionals is to figure out that perfect line of how can we make money doing the type of photography that we absolutely love. You mentioned Mary Ellen Mark and saying, I'm only going to do this type of photography, black and white, 8x10s, was it? Mm-hmm. How do you get to that point where, for me, I would love to just travel the world with my beautiful wife and take pictures for whomever, whatever, however. You know what I mean?
Snap out of it, Robert. What are you thinking here?
Well, to an extent, that's, you're doing that now too. How do you get, you work now your wife, Ann, works at Joe McNally Photography.
She is working with us. She used to be the director of the Pro Division here at Panorama, and for 12 years she was a Nikon technical representative.
Right. That's where I met her originally.
That's how I met her as well. Yeah. So, it's amazing that we've come full circle. And we had a bit of a window open this past year where we thought, let's take the chance and see if we can work together on this. And she has the vaunted title of our tiny little ramshackle studio. She is the director of social media and marketing, which sounds very highfalutin for a ragtag bunch that we are. But she's also phenomenal at it, and she's got a work ethic that makes me look like a slacker. And
that's what a lot of us photographers need. Obviously you've got a great work ethic, but we take pictures, we constantly want to be producing, and there's so much that goes into being a freelance photographer, not just the shooting aspect. There's the editing aspect, there's the social networking aspect, there's the personal networking aspect, there's doing these podcasts and workshops and speaking gigs and administrative and taxes and
Well, it is a complete. People who look at what they might perceive to be a successful photographer and think it's all about this overarching visual skill set or whatever are wrong, really, because any successful photographer is a mosaic of very many different varied bits and pieces. And what you just said is very true. You have a lot of different stuff going on, and now the digital age is wonderful, right? But what has it also done to us? It's pushed a lot of workload back on the photographer. You know, even like a newspaper shooter, you know, goes out, covers a job, you know, shoots 200 frames. The picture desk doesn't get 200 frames. That photographer is sitting in their radio car, editing it down to 5 pictures, working it slightly, doing a couple of contrast points and this and that, and then sending it in on email. So now the photographer is essentially become the editor of their own work. Right? Back in the day, when I grew up photographically, you had an agent. I was with Sigma, I was with Camera 5, places like that, and they would handle your business. They would become mother, really.
Right.
You know? I had photographers, you know, friends who would come and their agent would let them sleep on their sofa, you know, while they were in town for a while, you know. And that what historically was true about any photographic adventure that you would have is that you try to turn that into money by turning it over to your agent. If I shot a job for the National Geographic, when that job, the rights reverted back to me, I would give it to my agent, and my agent would market it all over Europe, Japan, etc., and try to get exclusives from the magazines in those countries. And so you'd have, you know, Figaro sparring with Paris Match, trying to get that story. So you could make, literally, in the aftermath of the really good story for the Geographic, you could make an extra $100,000.
Wow.
As a photographer. And that was why you could work editorially for low rates, because the Geographic would only pay you $500 a day, you know. But then if you could get that bump at the end of it, it would sort of become a package that would be sustainable. Now the National Geographic has, I think, 23 or something like that international editions. So immediately your exclusive is broken.
Then I think that they pay you though like an extra $50 per edition or something like that.
I've gotten checks from the National Geographic for the sale of my pictures that are under $5.
Unbelievable, yeah.
So I save them. I put 3 of them together, and then I go to the movies. You know, and the thing is, they come in codes. You can't even tell from what the disbursement is what picture sold and where it was sold to and what it was used for. And if you call the person who dispersed the check to you, they don't know either.
There's no accountability.
Let me not go down this path, because it's the path of bitterness and anger and dismay and despair.
It's okay.
I'm going to have a coffee.
Yes.
No, they're a wonderful organization. I've had many wonderful, amazing opportunities, but they are in the mix, as any magazine is, as any entity is right now. They're in the mix, the scrum of how do we make all this work? And that's a difficult equation on all fronts. And unfortunately, it kind of drives down to the lone freelance content provider, because we're set back on our own pins, right? The job is now ours to try to survive. We haven't got many staff positions. We maybe don't have an agent. So we are our own editor, our own Photoshop person. We run our business. We pay the bills. We do all those things. And I said this at a meeting we had at our studio the other day. Sometimes the business of being a photographer actually prevents me from taking pictures.
Interesting. It's true, yeah.
Because you just stay so busy trying to find work and keep the business running that it's precious little time to go wander the streets of New York on an early morning with beautiful light and just make some pictures for your blog. Mm-hmm. Hard.
Yeah, you know? And it's actually something that the younger photographers have a bit of an advantage of keeping your overhead low, having once you have more responsibility and more jobs and more things to deal with, it takes you away from sometimes what it is that you got into the business for originally, which was to take pictures. So speaking of business, you keep mentioning we, an hour, talking about your business. So obviously that means, do you have a team behind you when you say studio? Do you have a physical studio space? I mean, I know many photographers who say they have a studio. It's really just their office, Right. I don't know if that's the case for you or if you have an actual studio space.
It is. We grandly refer to our space as the studio. It's our workspace. It's very workable, very nice. It's part of my house, but it's not a shooting studio. I'm not going to get anybody to come to Ridgefield, Connecticut to pose for me. So I'm going to come to the city and rent a studio.
Right.
But we refer to it as the studio.
Sure.
It's our office. Lynn has an office there. I do have a team of people. They're wonderful people who work with me, and any photographer who who tells you that it's all about them is lying to you. It's a collective effort. And when we take on assistants, I always tell assistants, look, you're going to learn as much from Lynn, my business manager, my studio manager, and you will from me. Lynn, God bless her, has been with me for 23 years.
And so she is, that's a great thing.
Lynn is a gift of my life. Just amazing.
And she does business work with you, or
she?
I mean, that's so general. I don't know Lynn, so
I don't even know how many hats she actually wears during the course of an average day. But she does, most principally, she runs the business. She keeps the schedule. She does the bids, the estimates. She is also an amazing producer. Lynn has got me in for a commercial job at Preservation Hall in New Orleans. She's gotten me a 9-ton elephant in a dry lake bed. She's gotten me a 40-ton crane in the desert, and she's done.
Wow.
She is the glue that really kind of stitches the studio together. And as I say, God bless her, she stayed with me for both thick and thin times. And there were times where I could not pay Lynn for 3 or 4 weeks at a time, and she stuck it out with me. And for that, I owe her just no measure of thanks that could possibly be equal to the contribution she's made to our life and to a friendship, a really powerful friendship.
That's wonderful.
And then, of course, Annie is come on, and she does the social media and marketing, and she's my wife, so that's a pretty amazing event, to have the two of us working together and spending more time together. And then we have John and Callie, who are kind of share our first assistant duties. They're really on an equivalent footing right now. And then we have Linda, who is kind of part-time, full-time freelance. She's kind of logistics, an archivist. She manages all of the stuff. She's very exacting. Every time she frustrates the boys, we call them the lost boys, and they kind of roll their eyes at how exacting Linda is. I always look at them and say, you should thank Linda every day, because do you want to do the carnet list of all the serial numbers?
Oh, man.
No. Linda loves doing that. So just buy her a coffee every single day and be thankful she's around. So
was it 20? You say she was with you for 23 years, was it?
Lynn has been with me, yes.
And she was she basically your first business hire to help your business grow?
Well, I had a full-time first assistant for a number of years, but then I let go of that. I moved out of the city and really couldn't. It just logistically wasn't going to work to try to pull an assistant out of New York City every day, and also we were kind of in fairly dire straits. So. But eventually, I came to recognize, look, I need somebody to actually pick up the phone, because, again, young photographers don't realize, when National Geographic sent me to Africa for the first time. I was talking about this the other day. It was before cell phones, sat phones, email, any of that stuff. So when I went into the inland of Tanzania for 3 weeks, I was gone, and nobody was picking up the phone. So as a photographer at that point, I didn't have an agent, and I didn't have anybody. And so you come back, and it's like, your business is dead in the water. So that's when I put an ad for Lynn in the Hastings Enterprise. Busy photographer seeks help, 20 hours a week, flexibly arranged. And as I always say, I think Lynn worked 20 hours sometime in the early 90s. And she became indispensable right away. Yeah. And so now she routinely works 50, 60 hours a week.
I think that's an interesting step in every photographer's, I guess, path, because, I find myself, there's so many ventures you can do, and there's only, my grandmother talks to me, oh, you should connect with them and do this and that. I'm like, yeah, that's on my list of things to do. Right. But right now I'm pursuing this path and that path, and it's something I'll do eventually. But it's true, when you start hiring somebody to help you, to free you up on the business end, it gives you the flexibility to hit 1 or 2 more extra paths. Or then you hire somebody to help you pursue those special paths. It just sort of increases and compounds, I would assume.
We're very fortunate in the fact that we have a good, diverse group of skill sets under one roof right now, and everybody has their role. The young guys are phenomenal at digital tech and and they are the ones who do our retouching and whatnot. That's not my strong suit.
Now, these were the assistants you were talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing, mentorships. How important do you think it is for photographers to partake in mentorships, workshops, events like expos and things like those?
I think it's incredibly important nowadays that there is a dearth of honest-to-goodness jobs for young photographers. When I left school, the ethic of the Syracuse University photojournalism program was that most of their graduates went out into the world and got newspaper jobs. And as 22-year-olds, most of them did. In fact, I have a friend who works for a paper in South Jersey. He started working for that paper in 1976, and he's still working there, And that was an expectation that you could get a job in a newspaper. That has largely gone away. So what has replaced that sort of mentorship or that sort of connection to the business, I think, is the network of workshops, the possibilities of assisting or apprenticing to an established studio, and also the joining in on the digital community on the internet and participating in learning and exchanging of ideas and all that sort of stuff. But I use it as an example. I'm sure you know Drew Gurian.
Yeah, I was going to mention Drew. He's actually spoke here at our events here in this space.
Right. Drew was our first assistant for 5 years, and now he's carving himself out a very successful rock and roll business. A very unlikely place to carve out success.
Yeah.
Because fiercely competitive and all of that stuff. But he's doing a very smart job of it, and he made the progression in a sensible fashion. He stayed with us for 5 years, really got his feet on the ground. He became something of a household name, and then he launched his career, and it's going quite well. So that is a successful path.
It seems to me that, like, when we're talking about someone like Drew, he learned a lot from you, and I think in terms of also he was around you for lots of your workshops and your talks, and he has a lot of confidence in the education as well. So when he was here, it almost was like, wow, he's got this great keynote speech. He knows how to engage an audience. Clearly, I think he learned a lot of that from all his experience with you. So it's really, I'm sure he's a good talker.
I always tell him I sit in the back of an audience now, and I hear a couple of phrases that are identical to phrases that occasionally I use, and I always just chuckle, because I said, when I used to say stuff like that, Drew, you used to laugh at me, but I won't put you through that. Okay? All right?
Right. And then you're doing all these workshops now, like not only your own, you have, so I guess one of the things I should mention is the business going from, like I said, journalism to commercial to advertising, getting into video, becoming a cover photographer, not a cover girl, but a cover photographer, and then also diversifying in the sense of having other ways of producing revenue through speaking engagements, through books, through products. Oh, I was going to say, we don't have any product. We're in Panorama right now, and clearly they probably carry a bunch of your Joe McNally products, but I wanted to show a couple of those. But you actually also have products with your name on it, and these are relationships that you've built over the years with these different brand reps, and you thought did they come to you and ask you like, hey, we'd like you to come up with something, or did you find I think it was you probably that got me really shooting with small systems. Back in the day it was Nikon, I switched to Canon, and regardless, I small system speed lights with little soft boxes and gels and different types of remote controllers to blow those off. And now you have actual hot shoe soft boxes with your name on it. Can you tell me a little bit about getting into the business and actually having a product that you're selling on top of the photography and everything else?
Well, again, I think in terms of advice or an approach is the idea that as success as a photographer can involve having lots of lines in the water. What you suggested before, the variety of things, workshops or lectures, in addition to the main component, which still is true of our studio, of shooting. And the idea of being diversified as a photographer can, luckily, happily, or by accident, include perhaps a relationship with a manufacturer. In terms of the Last Light products that my name is on, the Last Light company, I was using their stuff and I wrote them a couple letters, and I kind of was like, it really would be better if it was like this. And most of the time, manufacturers don't listen to that. I was really blessed in the fact that the last light company actually did listen. Their chief designer is a great guy. He wrote me back a letter, and I was persistent enough. I said, you really should try it this way. They finally made like a softbox they were only making with a silver interior. And I said, you should make one with a white interior. They finally, I think maybe to kind of calm me down, they made me one. And that was the only one, and I had it. And then finally their designer came to a workshop, and I showed him the silver and I showed him the white, and they said, we should make the white one. And in fairness, they put my name on it, and it's kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of funny, it's kind of odd to me, but it's a wonderful development in the fact that manufacturers, I think, have come to a place, and certainly this is true of my camera system, Nikon. I'm a Nikon ambassador.
Right.
That they actually are kind of reaching out to photographers in a very positive way, soliciting their opinion, asking for advice, seeing what the next step is, and getting that information from the field. Engineers, God love them, bless them. Unbelievably smart people, but they tend not to be at the finish line of the Kentucky Derby in a rainstorm trying to fire a camera.
Right.
We have that kind of information,
right.
Which is not as precise technically as their world.
Yeah.
They derive information from that world. We give them real-time stuff.
Yeah.
And the mix of that is where a great camera comes from.
Right. Absolutely. Let me also mention, you've got a couple of books here. We have a couple, one of our folks brought in, but numerous books, and this is just two of many that you can find on Amazon. We'll put them on a little link right here or something like that on YouTube, so you can go check them out. Tell me about getting into the world of creating books. I mean, physical picture books, but these are also not just picture books. They're educational. They've got lots of great information.
They strive to be. I strive to talk in a down-to-earth, conversational tone, and I try to be funny about the experience of being a photographer, and because it is funny, right? I mean, the things that happen to you in the field are ridiculous. You fall in the right direction and you find a good picture, or you do everything right and you come up with a picture that is absolute garbage. I mean, it's very much a crapshoot out there. So if you just tell that story, it has resonance certainly for other photographers, and that's what I found via some of the books that I've done. And I have to, tip of my hat to Scott Kelby, who came forward at first, and The Moment of Clicks was the first book that I wrote myself, and he said, look, you have to do this book, and I've got the title, and I'll help you get it started. And that would pave the way for a couple other books, which I've done on hot shoe flash, devoted to speed light use and all of that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And they've been arduous but also fun to write, and as I always say, I might as well write it down before I get to the point in my life where I forget everything anyway. So there's part of the motivation.
I mean, you're going to have a lasting legacy. That's what's really cool, is that you're going to have a book. It's going to have your name on it. Not just people that you've been mentoring and talking to over the past 30 some years at workshops and networking, whatever, but people 50 years from now will still look at these photos and these books and learn from them, and I think that that's a pretty amazing thing, as well as these podcasts. That's what's really cool about this age. And just yesterday and today, I searched your name on podcasts and found all these great podcasts with you, like Kelby. There was a handful of other different photography podcasts out there, which I think is great.
Well, I was mentored. That's the thing. I was mentored as a young photographer, and that was a very powerful thing for me as a young photographer, to meet established pros who are willing to spend some time. I mean, I did ridiculous things. I got the phone numbers from, I was a copy boy at the Daily News. I got the phone numbers from the art director of the Sunday News magazine of a couple of photographers I admired. I flew to the West Coast and I went to LA and I called up Douglas Kirkland. Sight unseen, called him at home. I said, Mr. Kirkland, I'm very much a fan of your work. I'm a copy boy at the New York Daily News. My name's Joe McNally. I'd like to come over and show you my work. I mean, cheeky son of a bitch, right? Now they'd call the police immediately, say, I have a stalker outside, and Douglas couldn't have been more gracious.
Yeah.
He pulled his punch. I mean, he looked at my work and said, this stuff is fabulous. You're going to be a great photographer. This is just great. And I knew that was kind of, can I say bullshit on this program?
Yes, you may.
And then I went to see Con Keys, talk about a day of contrast. I went to see Con Keys, who was the director of photography at the time, of the LA Times. And he looked at my work and he said, "You're never going to make it. You're done. You're toast. You might as well move on."
Really?
And that was kind of an interesting
Everyone
day.
seems to have those stories of like the one person or the one place that's written you a letter or said something.
The best was when I drove to San Francisco and I called Paul Fusco. I don't know if anybody knows that name. Magnum photographer, very, very powerful photographer. I admired his work very much. I said, "Mr. Fusco, I'd love to come to your house and show you my work. I'm a young photographer. I admire your work very greatly." And Paul actually was great. He sat down with me. We had a cup of coffee, and he made 2 piles out of my work. He said, "This doesn't work. This is going in a good direction." And that was intelligent criticism. It gave me a lifeline. It showed me kind of there was a path that I could find somehow within the body of work that I had. And that opportunity to be mentored is something that I think is very, very powerful still now. And it's a pass it along business. Mm-hmm. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
You know, and if you have any advice to offer young photographers or the community in general, you know, let it go. I mean, there's some photographers out there I know, they kind of be secretive about their life and times and way to do this and that. And the very first thing I always tell people, there's no secrets to this business. There are no secrets, man.
Yeah, I think that's important. Some people do keep secrets, and I think those people end up not doing as well. And that's because I think it's really important. Someone comes to me and asks me for my contact somewhere, asks me what my rates are, asks for advice of how to quote, contracts, yada, yada. The most important thing for me is for that person to be as successful as possible, to sign the right contract, and to make as much money as they possibly can, or else they might be undercutting me, and they're setting a poor precedent in the industry. Mm-hmm. So I think that what you do, what many of these people, especially how small this industry is, you've got to give back, and educate the younger generation, I suppose, of photographers so that they know how to be good business people and make good decisions. Absolutely. And there's great organizations like National Press Photographers Association, ASMP, that you all should check out for that. There's also great workshops, which I think I've been to a bunch of them. I don't think I've been to them with you there, but Eddie Adams' workshop, you've worked with them in the past. So you go to all these expos as well, and do you tend to go to these expos to give off more business information, or is it more to promote different products which you might be affiliated with, or do they bring you in just to share your photography, to use you as a pool?
Well, there's different roles that you can play. Like at Photo East, which is a big photo expo, I almost always teach a lighting class, and that's an educational lighting class that usually goes on for 2 or 3 hours. And then occasionally I'll be asked to give a lecture in a booth, like the Nikon booth, for instance. And there's a distinction there. I'm a Nikon ambassador, and I am showing work, and I am talking about how to use gear, but also, quite obviously, it's under the banner of Nikon. That's my system, and I'm proud to do that. I mean,
right.
I bought my first Nikon camera in 1973. Yeah. So, for me to actually come to a point where Nikon has sort of said, we'd like you on board. That's like,
it's really nice. Yeah, of course.
Because I remember in school, there was a Nikon World. It was called a magazine, and I remember looking at that magazine when I was a kid, and there were color pictures in there from Jay Maisel, Pete Turner, Al Satterwhite, Eric Mayola, and I remember looking at that, and I was thinking, if I could ever get a picture in a book like this, that would be amazing. And so now, all these years later, to kind of be a Nikon contributor, well, I'm very proud of that.
And all of these things, like, there's many different systems out there. Other people use different things, but they're all tools,
They are tools.
And that's everyone feels comfortable with whatever it is they shoot. I've gone through Nikon. I've gone through Canon. I've shot I stick with 35 millimeter for the most part. You've obviously done this huge Polaroid project. Can we maybe pull up a few photos? I'm thinking that maybe we should share a few things, but the big Polaroid project maybe, or something along those lines, just to show some of the different type of work that you do here.
Sure.
But I guess what I'm getting at is these are all different types of tools, and everybody becomes familiar with whatever it is that they okay, yeah. This was an insane project. I've never seen anything like this. Was this like a one-of-a-kind camera that you used here?
It was. It was called Moby C. It lived on the Lower East Side of New York, and it had a couple of different names. Some folks refer to it as the 40 by 80. And the camera itself is the size of a one-car garage. So you physically have two people inside the camera while you're working it from the outside.
No way.
You can see this giant silk up here. There's a lot of light going through that silk. About 30,000 watt seconds would give me an f-stop of about f45. The lens is in the wall. It's from a U-2 spy plane. It's about 70 pounds of glass stuck in the wall. You cannot focus the camera. You have to focus your subject. So you have to move the subject back and forth, inch at a time, until the two people inside the camera, which is back in here, could see the catch lights in their eyes become the most crystalline. And of course, they're looking at a reversed image. So then they would know that the subject would be sharp. Then you'd have to tell the subject to stay steady, black the lights out, because I had to work camera obscura. There was no shutter. So you had to pull a cap off the lens.
Oh, wow.
So what I did was I bore-sighted an Mamiya RZ directly underneath the Polaroid lens, and I wired the strobe system into the Mamiya. And so I'd pull the cap off the Polaroid, I'd fire the RZ, and I'd get a simultaneous dupe. I'd get a giant Polaroid, and I'd get a picture that was that big.
Wow.
Okay, so those are 4 feet by 9 feet. That's the iteration of the show that was at Grand Central Station in January of 2002.
Oh,
and
man.
it traveled 7 cities, and then it opened again in New York on the first anniversary of 9/11, right where they put the Christmas tree in Rock Center. They threw a tent over that entire plaza and put them in there.
Wow, that's amazing. Would that be, okay, so I don't know, you talk about different ways you can get your work seen. You know, at one point for you, it was, someday I could just get my photo in the Nikon World magazine. You know, I remember thinking, oh my God, I want to get my photo in the Athens Messenger when I was in high school, you know, where I lived in Athens, Ohio. And, you know, that came true. And then, you know, you work your way up, and I've had a lot of things. I've done a little bit of a gallery thing, very, very small gallery thing here in New York, SB Digital. Chang Lee, do you know Chang Lee? His
Sure.
wife,
Yeah,
Sobel.
great shooter.
They have a little gallery in the Lower East Side that I did a little something. But I've gone to places, you look at photos like this, it's up on your screen, you know, you're displaying in one of the busiest spots in New York City, these huge photos. I remember being, where were we? In I think Paris, and there was a photographer, I forget who now, who had their photos along the river, there beside one of the beautiful castles. It was about, they did like a story on the coffee beans. It was actually an advertisement, but it was like a photo exhibit like this, massive photos on this huge scale where people from all over the world can just walk by and see. How does it feel to get to that point? And when you did this, do you feel that this was like a crowning achievement, that it put you?
No. This was actually a very humbling experience. It's a business about relationships. So to this day, the most important thing for me is the fact that I have relationships with people. Like Louis Caccioli was the cover of a book that resulted from the exhibit. And Louis and I speak now, you know, on a fairly regular basis. We always speak on 9/11 morning. And the first house, this gentleman back here, is John Baldessari. And he's a firefighter with Ladder 9, Engine 33 on Great Jones Street. He's now a lieutenant there. And every 9/11 morning since 9/11, I've been at Ladder 9, Engine 33, just to pay my respects, because they were the first house to come by the camera. That's the important thing. The role I played was infinitesimally small compared to what these folks did. The camera just stood in service to them. And that is what is the legacy for me at this point, is just the relationships that I built out of that and the closeness I have with people from that time. Mike and Billy. This is my favorite shot from the original series. If you take away the radios, that picture could have been made 50 years ago. I mean, the technology and whatnot that they're holding, you know.
Yeah.
So Mike Morrissey and Billy Ryan.
Well, I think also you mentioned these relationships that you've kept, and I've heard you talk in other talks in the past as well, that it's about that relationship that you build. You might have taken, I believe on the actual website for this project, it shows that you didn't just shoot these people with this camera. You actually went to some people's homes, to their ladder companies, and if I'm faces at ground zero there.
Yeah, not at that time. Many years later, I was asked to go back, and for instance, Life asked me to go back 10 years later, and so that's Danny Foley right there, and that's Danny 10 years later. So Danny came and posed for this picture. His brother Tommy was killed on 9/11. He was on the first trucker rescue 3. Danny found Tommy's body 3 days before he came in and posed for this picture. So I still stay in touch with the Foley family, and I've done pictures for them. And then all these years later, life asked me to go back. And because I've maintained good relationships, and I've been the good shepherd of these pictures, and never seen them used in an untoward fashion, they're okay. They welcome me back into their life. And now that is, that's Danny all these years later, 10 years later. And of course, the important editorial information there is every fire he goes into, he's got Danny's mask card, or Tommy's mask card in his helmet. That's what he goes into every fire with. So I lit the portrait so that you can see that, and that's their sister Joanne, and that was Tommy's ceremonial helmet, and that's Joanne 10 years later. So Joe Hodges is a good friend. He's retired now. There he is in retirement on Staten Island. So that's the gentleman you saw in the black and white. That's John Baldessari, 10 years later, lieutenant at Engine 33.
It was interesting. I wasn't sure about that because I guess when I was scrolling through those, I was thinking, you did them in different places. But as I look at them, like, yeah, they do look different. And it's because it's 10 years different.
10 years later, yep.
That's really great. Okay, so I want to start wrapping up a bit because I know we've been going at it for about an hour now. But so I want to just make sure we promote all your things. You do all these workshops now. That's what it's all about. This is a promotional thing for everyone that's involved. But so we got your workshops that you do through the ambassador program. But do you do some on your own as well? Do you hold your own Joe McNally workshops?
I would have to say at this point, sort of rarely. We do things on our own. We've always run a lighting workshop in St. Lucia, of all places, which has been a fun destination event for us every year. Kind of this very strange a wonderful relationship that began. I was sent to this hotel to do a cover story in 1992 for Travel Holiday magazine, and to this day I have a relationship with the hotel. We're not doing it this year. We're going to punch it into next year because this year has grown fairly busy. We do certain things, like I'm going over to Dubai. I go there every year, and I teach over there. I have relationships there. And
so these are basically relationships you've had with other workshops, not necessarily your own workshop,
right,
but other workshops
right,
that you're involved with. I see.
Yep.
Cool, yeah. And so you've got a couple upcoming ones that look good.
And you can see from here as well, I teach for the National Geographic.
Right.
They do a workshop series, so they ask their photographers to step forward in that role as well.
When did you start doing this workshops? Like when was it? So you're like an educator now. You did the School of Hard Knocks like we talked about earlier. You came in, you paid your dues, you worked your butt off, you took amazing photos. At what point do you become an instructor, somebody that gives advice and people look up to and come to learn from, like you are today?
Well, the first workshop I ever taught was very daunting. I filled in for William Albert Allard.
Oh my gosh.
I was asked to fill in to those shoes, which are impossible to fill, and I was very nervous. But I found that I enjoyed teaching, and I've done a bit more of it over the years. But what the teaching, I think, has to hook up to is real-time experience in the field. And yes, I've got this tremendous backlog of experience that I've logged over 35 years of shooting, but at the same time, we are in the field a great deal, and what I find is that real time in the field translates into being a more effective teacher. It's definitely a hand-in-glove relationship, So you have to keep shooting if you're going to continue to be an effective teacher, I think.
Yeah, and that's what you do. You do that. So this is actually a photo from 10 years ago now. This is at the not Kentucky Derby, the Churchill Downs
workshop. I was a child at the time.
You were a mere child and very informal. This is where I first met you, actually. This is a photo by Chris Dietrich, and then
Dave Black.
Acting like a fool there. But it was an amazing workshop. Jeff Snyder was there. The Nikon folks were there. A bunch of really great photographers came through this.
You were there, right?
I was there. These are just some random snaps.
But there's your work, right?
Yeah, so these
are
your
work from this workshop.
Yeah, this is a couple photos. I ended up, a lot of people go for the sports action. That's what it was about. But I think I was inspired by a lot of your portraiture. And at that point, I was really getting into shooting, a lot of portraiture and using natural light and trying to learn artificial light through you. But I think that there's a little bit of action here. But this is, part of the workshop that we got to experience and photographing all the people. What I did is I went around the the area and took pictures and portraits of all the different people that were involved, you know, from the grooms to the trainers to I don't know who he was, this guy who had a massive goiter.
Very effective. I mean, you know,
cool.
The educational process does work, and as I mentioned, Drew Gurian earlier, I think that's a good indication that it's still a powerful part of photography. I think as I say, I got mentored. The guys at the Daily News took me under their wing. It started back then, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning from people. I still revere photographers. I collect books, you know, of work, you know, and I've had heroes at magazines I'm shooting for. You know, when I started shooting for the Geographic, my hero there was Jim Stanfield. I don't know if anybody remembers that name. He was the Iron Horse of photography, and he was in his 60s. And, you know, when Jim comes to me and he goes, "Joe, I just got this job. I'm going to sit front seat in an open cockpit biplane, and we're going to go around the world."
Exciting. Yeah.
Like, you know, most people would say, "I'm not going to do that because it's going to be massively uncomfortable and dangerous." And Jim couldn't wait, you know, and he's in his 60s, and he's still, like, I still feel that, like, I still kind of have this thing that your next picture is your best picture.
Right.
And that's the fuel for the fire.
Right.
You know, absolutely.
I had a star here about following your passion, and you've built your career to do what it is that you want to do. Is travel? What is your passion right now? Is it to travel? Is it to spend time with your family? Is it just to take beautiful pictures? Like what is it? If you could say the next 5 years, if you could do whatever it is,
spend more time with Annie.
Nice. Just here in Connecticut, New York, or traveling around?
The beautiful thing about working together is that Annie can come with me much more frequently. So last year she went to Dubai with me, and this past year we were just in Switzerland, and we were doing a series of traveling workshops there for Nikon Switzerland. So the wonderful thing about that relationship now, and that it's now kind of edged into very much our work life, is that we do spend much more time together. And I'm not being facetious about that. I mean, I really, you know, my account on Delta last year came in at 422,000 miles.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
So you've got a few free flights.
We do have a few
And you get
free
bumped
flights.
up? Does that help you get bumped up? It's not international, right? It doesn't bump you in international.
I play the game. I always buy coach and hope for an upgrade.
Yeah.
And it works about 50% of the time, you know?
But don't you feel good when that happens? It's like,
oh, I feel like I won the lottery. Are you kidding me? I spend so much time on airplanes, it's ridiculous, you know? And
my wife just got bumped up to silver status, and she's got us upgraded twice now. And once was on a plane that had nobody, basically 3 or 4 people in coach. And so they, you know, they got the first class treatment in coach. I'm like, damn it, they're not supposed to get that kind of treatment. So anyways, you had mentioned the traveling. Do you know Terry and Lintha Eiler at Ohio University? Terry and Lintha were both Geographic shooters back in the day.
No.
Terry is the founder of the School of Visual Communications at Ohio University, and Lintha is his wife. They were both Geographic shooters. Terry was an editor and a shooter, and Lintha was a shooter. They've done all these projects together, working in the Grand Canyon on Geographic assignments, going, I think, to the North or South Pole or something, one of these things. And ever since then, I've been inspired. And then they also have a yearly Scotland field school they do through Ohio University, which was my first time getting out of the country and going out on a photographic adventure as a travel photographer. So those two people really inspired me. I want to be able to travel the world, do what I love, taking pictures with the person that I love. And what they ended up doing, after working at Geographic, becoming professors basically, and they've built this life where they get to travel to Scotland every year, the place that they love. They brought their family every year from the time that they were babies until their daughter Christina was a year younger than me in high school, that she went to Ohio University as a photographer. Got to bring them. I think it's amazing to be able to do exactly that, get to a point where you're doing what you want to do, being able to support yourself in the way that you love through.
Well, I would, you know, just chip in there and just say that, you know, again, one of my heroes and mentors was Carl Mydans. I don't know if anybody knows that name. He made the MacArthur Waiting Ashore picture. He and Shelley, his wife, were in the Pacific Front for Life magazine during World War II, and they were taken prisoner of war. And they were returned in a prisoner POW exchange, and the two of them went right back into the front. Shelley would do Carl's captions for him. And that, to me, left a lasting impression when I was a young photographer. Like, how can you make this work and make it work not only for your photography, but for your life?
That's great. Do you have any? I actually am going to announce today that I'm going to be hosting, along with a partner of mine, Peter Lockley, a workshop in Maui, Hawaii.
Nice.
Sort of a luxury workshop. It's going to take place at the Four Seasons Resort. It's going to be...
Need a guest lecturer, Robert?
Well, yes. I'd love to grow it. It's proof of concept right now, but it's MauiWorkshop.com. This is the first time I'm actually mentioning it. But I've been a student in many. I've helped produce at Eddie Adams' workshop and been part of different workshops throughout the years. Do you have advice for someone like myself getting into, lecturing and becoming an instructor and ways to deal with people as an instructor? Because for me, I still, I'm 32. I still feel like a baby in this industry, so I'm sure that it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to get past that. Hey, I'm still learning myself, and I think we all are still learning.
Absolutely. But
do you have any advice for people that want to get into education a little bit, or to do these types of workshops?
Well, I think you're in a very good position because you have a seaworthy body of editorial and commercial work. It's not a negative tone that I'm striking here, but there are lots of photographers out there teaching who probably should refrain from doing so. Is that mildly diplomatically worded enough in a congenial fashion? Photographers are hard-pressed across the board, and so you see in virtually every photographer's website workshops. And some of them are tried and true and very valid. But I think the best thing that you can do, and you are doing, is combining your educational instincts and your ability to share and articulate the knowledge that you're deriving from your experience in the field. So, I'm 62, so what does an athlete do as they age? They coach, that's okay with me. The wonderful thing and the amazing thing is that we still shoot more than we teach. Like, I got a big production I'm doing tomorrow. 3 assistants, hair, makeup, styling, talent, props, you name it, lighting a whole theater. I'm going to crunch it all day long. And there's a good fee attached to it, and that's what I live for. But I also love the company of photographers, and you actually do that as well. I can already tell, and I know that since Churchill Downs, you have to enjoy the company and camaraderie of photographers.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to be open and free and clear about your information and not be threatened at all about the fact that if I let this idea go, somebody might steal a job from me. That's never going to happen. Again, I'll just cite, and forgive me for this, for citing, older photographers, but I think if you search the records, you'll find these people. Ralph Morse. I always say Ralph Morse was the dean of American space photography. He did the original Merc 7 stuff for life. And when we were young kids, we were assigned to go shoot the space shuttle. None of us knew how to do it. Ralph took us all to lunch, sat down with us, told us exactly how to do it. And he was shooting for time. We were his competition. But he was so confident in his own skill set that he knew he was going to go out and kick our ass anyway, which he did. Which he did. Because he had backdoor connections with NASA none of us could ever dream of. He had his cameras closer to the rocket than anybody, and he kicked everybody's ass.
Speaking of NASA, and I think maybe one of the last times I saw you spoke at Photo Shelter's Luminance workshop.
Okay.
And we met up on Alan's roof deck.
Right.
And you guys had gone out to some sort of like lecturer's dinner or something, but I was with Brad Mangian and Mr. Pettit was his name, the astronaut.
Don Pettit, yep.
Don Pettit, who was a photographer in space. He spent like a year or something on the space station. I forget the exact details of it.
Yep.
But we sat up there, and then you guys ended up joining us, and I had some of the most amazing conversation with an astronaut about taking photography. I mean, just the amazing what's out there for photographers. You can even do astrophotography, and as what's going to happen in the next 30 years with space flight, with everything. Who's going to be the first photojournalist to go out in space and do a documentary? It's mind-boggling. Also, I wanted to mention one more thing before we maybe open up to a few questions and maybe look at a little bit of your work. We haven't really looked at much work because we've been talking about so much business here, but I have underlined retirement. And in terms of not thinking, not that you should retire, but as
I'm out of here.
As a photographer, as a young photographer, all photographers as business people should be thinking about their retirement. And I'm curious, so you talk about Jay Maisel. he made one hell of an investment back, 30, 40 years ago. Bought a huge building down in the Lower East Side and just sold it for untold fortunes. And
Jay's a very smart man.
He's a very, very smart man, and we all look up to him. Do you have any suggestions to younger photographers or anything about what they should be considering, investing money in different ways, or saving, or have you had any experience in that you
Yes, it's mostly rueful experience, really. And it leads to the fact that I'll never retire, really. Photographers get into this headlong and passionate and young and foolish. And we dive headlong after a picture without really any regard for the consequences, either physical, emotional, or financial. That's historically been the story of many a young shooter. And I don't advise against that, because passion is what drives your instinct for a photograph. But yes, I think you have to be moderated in the sense of understanding that this is a very physical business. And as you get older, it's not kind. And the thing that you have to plan for is, when do you stop taking pictures? I'll probably never stop, hopefully, but there's a certain point where, your physical skills diminish. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that old phrase, experience is the comb God gives you when you no longer have any hair, that kind of thing, So experience dictates that you should plan early and plan young. That's nothing new to say to anybody, really, in any industry. But photographers, we tend to reinvest in our own selves and our own business in the next piece of glass or something like that. I would suggest prudence and taking some of your revenue stream and making sure it gets diverted into something entirely apart from photography via whatever it is, Wall Street, real estate, yeah. Just have some money apart from this business, because this business is iffy at best.
Absolutely. I think that's great. It's great to sort of end our discussion on. I don't know if there was anything that you have coming up that you wanted to share or talk about, any new projects.
I have some stuff I'm shooting I can't really talk about, in terms of the overall extent of it. I'm also happy for any questions.
I'd like to open this up. We have a microphone here in the back if anybody has any questions for Joe. Anybody? Questions? Bueller? No questions. Crickets. Nope. Looks like no questions.
All right, cool.
Well, so it goes. Wait, we do have a couple questions from the internet.
Okay.
So I'm just starting with photography. I'm 23. What tips you have for a beginner like me?
So he's just someone on the internet is 23. He's just starting photography. What kind of tips do you have for a beginner like he?
Keep doing exactly what you just did, which was maybe listen to a podcast or keep informed. And also identify, a path. I mean, lots of photographers have a hard time sort of finding that which resonates most powerfully for them. And again, it's a little bit of a pet peeve, I guess, or interest, let's call it an interest, that you dive into the history of this field and look at work that's gone before, because you'll find images that will resonate with you emotionally, and that may be an indication to you of the path you should take photographically. So when I went to see John Loengard, who was the DOP at Life magazine, I was a young photographer. I had a bunch of lighting efforts in my portfolio and a bunch of other stuff. And he separated them and he said, look, this lighting stuff that you're doing has more energy than the rest of this work. That was an interesting message to receive at that point in my career. It's like, yeah, okay. I am having fun doing that. I am intrigued by the concept of using light and managing it. And he identified that like that. He's one of the smartest picture editors I ever worked for. And so people can put up signposts for you. And so listen to those, follow those.
Get advice. Always put other eyes on your work. I have a problem with editing my own work.
Sure.
It's really, really hard for me.
Seek opinions.
Do you edit your own work?
I do, but I also solicit the opinions of everybody in the studio, because everybody has different visual strengths, especially when I shoot fashion or style or elegance, which I'm shooting tomorrow. Again, Lynn is very, very smart when it comes to look, style, fashion. She'll see something wrong with a collar, and I'm looking at the whole thing, right? It's like photographing dancers. Oh my God, photographed ballerinas for 30 years, and they come over to the screen and they go, oh, you can't use that picture. You've got this beautiful picture, and you want to use it. And they say, oh, you can't use that. Look at my fingers. You know, they're like this. They're supposed to be like that. And they've been trained. You can understand it. They've been trained their whole life to do this. So if you have a picture of them with this, then to them, that's not going to work. So you have to respect the artist as an artist. You have to make that bridge, and you have to try harder.
How do you feel about digital manipulation? I heard you talking about your recent gallery exhibition, or not gallery, you did a book. Was it a book or gallery or both? Where you did, so your life's work, and there were some frames that, had little things that could have been cloned out, but you didn't because, how do you feel about that and also in terms of, Instagram and all that kind of stuff these days? Do you feel it isn't just an art form, or do you feel because you started as a photojournalist, as did I. I started as a photographer, so I try to get everything done in camera. I try to eliminate. A lot of photographers go in and they'll just shoot. They don't really care about exposure or issues that they're having technically because they feel they'll just fix it up in post. What's your process and thought?
I think I call it the democracy of digital. Everybody finds their own path. I grew up with the click of the shutter being the beginning and the end of the process, pretty much, and I'm still there. I'm not saying we don't do Photoshop. We do. We tweak and curve and bend things. Basic darkroom work is what we do. Most of the stuff gets done in the camera. But there are artists, photographers out there for whom the click of the shutter is just the beginning of the process, just the beginning of it. And they have a path in mind, and that's a great path, whatever it ends up being. They assemble pieces of pictures. They end up with pictures that are predestined to another point from where they started. And along the way, they assemble things either in post or from other pictures, etc. I respect that art form. It's fine. There's a wonderful kind of community of skills out there, and I respect whatever approach you choose to take. It's fine by me.
Yeah.
But don't call my studio to start reworking the skyline of New York City or something like that. That's the kind of work we just don't do.
Right.
We pretty much are tried and true. We do some basic darkroom work and we deliver to a client.
That's great. All right. So I think that we can pretty much close it up unless anyone has any last questions. Just raise your hand.
Sir, did you have a question that? No? Okay.
He was passing the microphones over.
All right.
But social media, your Joe McNally photo on pretty much everything, right?
Yeah, at Joe McNally Photo, and we have a blog, joemcnally.com/blog, etc. So yeah, we're out there. We're not hard to find. That's one of the things about being a freelance photographer. You don't want to make yourself hard to find. Yeah. You want to make yourself accessible, and hopefully, people respond by looking at your work, and hopefully it goes forward from there, either in terms of jobs, assignments, or engagement.
Okay. I was just told we have one last question from the internet.
So with the market being saturated with more and more photographers, how do you see the future of photography in terms of having a rewarding career in it?
So let's kind of repeat that.
The saturated market, how do you see a future as a photographer in this very difficult marketplace, et cetera? People are sort of fixated on that. I gave the keynote speech at the Hallmark Institute of Photography a couple years ago, and I looked and I kind of grinned at everybody. I said, "Look, everybody's heard good news about the photographic marketplace, right? Like it's just roses out there, assignments dropping from trees, all that sort of stuff." And they were like, "No, of course, there's doomsayers everywhere, but there were doomsayers when I started as well. There were people who looked at me and said, "What are you, nuts? You're going to be a photographer? That's crazy. You can't make a living as a photographer." And yeah, it's different now, and it's maybe even more difficult now, but this has never been easy. And so the thing that I always say about photography is that photography is not something you do. Being a photographer is something you are.
Yeah.
And if you are a photographer, you've basically got no choice. You're screwed. You've got to go forward. You've got to find a way. And if you're passionate enough about this, and I think it was Jay who actually said, at one point, he said, this is, you're crazy to get into this business. But if you're crazy enough to get into the business, you might just be crazy enough to succeed. Mm-hmm. It kind of goes hand in glove. So the only way you can experiment with this is to do a full blast, jump in with both feet, and let it go, let it rip, and see what happens.
Well, that's great words to end by. I just want to make sure everybody knows to go to photobrigade.com/live, where they can see all these different live events that we have, whether it's streaming live, upcoming events that are happening here at Adorama, and past events that we have on our YouTube page. It's youtube.com/photo brigade. So please subscribe to us, check out all our different podcasts on iTunes that are audio, and just see what we're doing. We're doing all sorts of really cool things, and we're really going to be growing in the next year. Also, you can check out mauiworkshop.com now. That's officially happening and live. Joe, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Many thanks, especially to everybody who's here at Adorama. I mean, you guys are troopers.
Yep. Thanks for braving the cold, everybody.
Really should buy you all a cup of coffee. Thank you.